Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socialist podcast. And for today's episode, I have a group of artists here who are working with a project called The Question of Funding. I'm here with Yazan Khalili and Sami, Khaldi. So, hey guys, would you guys like to introduce yourselves to the audience?
Okay, so I am, my name is Yazan Khalili. You can call me Yaz. And I'm one of the founding members of the Question of Funding Collective. And I'm an artist and architect, and I would say a cultural producer, if one can use these definitions. I'm doing my PhD now at University of Amsterdam, researching cultural institutions in Palestine, looking at the economical changes that influenced the cultural the cultural production mainly. It's still developing as a research, and that's like kind of the main things I want to say.
Sure, we'll get into more. We'll get into more on that in a bit.
So Sami Khaldi, I am from Jerusalem, and I've been working in financial consulting and kind of development consulting for the past around 10 years. My background is in finance and development and economics, but I've always been interested in, like, since 2010, I've been interested in money, cryptocurrencies, and these kinds of like exchange systems. I joined the Question of Funding Collective, was it 2 or 3 years ago?
I think 2.
around the same time, 2 years ago. We've been kind of developing our thinking around then.
Mm-hmm. So can you guys maybe explain a bit, because the Question of Funding, I think, is the name of the collective, but also it's a reference to a very specific question around funding in relation to Palestine, and its relation to, I guess, being dependent on international funding from charities or from these types of NGOs, and kind of like the problems that are associated with that, I guess. Do you care to explain that a bit more deeply?
Maybe I speak about the collective. So the collective was first formed as a title of communal sessions that we were conducting in Ramallah as part of a cultural center, which is called Khalili Cultural Center. And we were doing it in collaboration with another institution called Grassroots Al-Quds. The idea was to bring to the front, in front of everyone, the dilemmas, the financial shifts that were happening in our cultural and societal productions and institutions, and to discuss them with the community as part of the bigger question that the people have been asking about funding and about the economical structures in the community. Meaning that this collective came out of different meetings as part of cultural institutions, and slowly this question became the name of the collective itself. And we kind of left these cultural institutions and became more of individuals, and began and formed this as individuals, we formed this collective, and we took this question to be the title. So we work between the question and the collective. So, and this is kind of a confusion that helps us also, like, to work through confusions allows us to never have a clear answer of what to define and how to define ourselves. Are we the question or are we the collective? And how the collective and the question relate to each other. But maybe I'll leave to Sami also to speak more about the question itself, the question of funding.
Yeah. So just a bit about the collective. I mean, in my experience, it was kind of like a lecture that posed the question, the question of funding, مسألة التمويل. So, like, what do we do about this? To me, it intrigued me in terms of like, it kind of was trying to come up with kind of solutions for this question of funding. I actually didn't go to the first meeting, but ended up joining later. But it was interesting to kind of, I'm not even sure if the intent was to come up with solutions, but maybe to understand what's going on with everybody. Why is, especially cultural institutions, why is the cultural scene changing? And there's a huge issue of, money in the cultural scene and funding. And a bit about that background. So funding in Palestine is a huge issue. So, and that has, political connotations because, by design, Palestine is not a real country. So, in terms of government, so when there was a peace treaty between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Israel in 91, and then the PA, Palestinian Authority, is this new body that controlled part of the land in historical Palestine, a very small segment. So it's really an authority or a government without real powers. And I think by design, they tried to keep it from having too much powers. So what that means is that the Palestinian government doesn't have enough resources to kind of control their fate. So to control the economy, to control the resources. And this is where donor money comes in, because in reality, it's a state under occupation. And occupation usually pays for governing the occupied. But in our situation, Israel kind of pulled out a bit, let the Palestinian Authority kind of govern and pay for its own occupation. So, and you don't want any authority like that to have too much power. So what do? You remove the resources. And this is where you have European funders, international agencies funding, the Palestinian people, giving money to the PA so that it can survive. It's kind of like, doses of opium so that, people stay, sanitized and don't rally up because, the situation is horrible, and also saves the occupier from paying for an occupation, because occupations are usually expensive. So, going back, that's the political segment of it. That's why Palestine usually has a lot of funding. And I'm not trying to say that in a situation as bad as Palestine, in terms of like oppression and, need for resources, there should be funding. International funding as well, that's fine, but not in the scale that exists right now, where funding agencies sometimes have even more power than the government itself. So this is kind of the sphere where we exist, where everything is reliant on funding in the cultural scene and international funding, European at times, American, whatever, but everything is kind of dictated by it. If you want to do anything, you apply for a proposal for funding. And we lost that grassroots structures where, for example, even if it's a football club that was formed by neighborhoods that didn't really need that much resources, after a while, if they applied for funding, they would get huge amounts of funding from from an European agency for development, instead of actually raising up the money, the resources from the community. So it became just easier for them, and it kind of lost the soul. People stopped volunteering, and that was volunteering and togetherness was a huge aspect because of the first Intifada. Because it's kind of a revolution. So people band together and create these amazing structures, and these structures are starting to dismantle because of funding, because it's not based on people's relation to each other, people's supporting each other and being resilient. It's rather than it's somebody institutionalized. It became institutionalized, and institutions apply for funding from external parties, and they have to adjust themselves to fit that external funding.
Maybe it's good to add two things to this. One, that Israel, for example, is one of the biggest subsidized countries in the world. It gets much more funding than the Palestinian Authority, but it's a different kind of fund. When you have a kind of a sovereignty, you can channel the funding differently than when you are a country under occupation. That's one thing. The second thing is that the formation of the Palestinian Authority happened at a shift in international economy, and the kind of dominance of the neoliberal economy, meaning the financialization of the economy. And what happened with the Palestinian formation of the Palestinian Authority, that economy became the way of struggle, rather than it is part of a political economy that brings economy under a kind of a political structure. In that shift that's happening in the world, economy became, or the finance became the dominant structures, and they kind of led the way we can imagine independence, or we can imagine a state and the role of the state somehow. So this is kind of a time where you can see liberation movements turning into neoliberalism or neoliberal structures, and how this and there were, through funding, through the donor economy, through being totally dependent on donor economy, they became one of the most extreme cases of how neoliberalism is adopted and acts within these communities. Like, look at South Africa. At that time, you talk about the Palestinian Authority, you talk about Lebanon, you can talk about, Egypt. Like these kind of shifts that were happening are not only in Palestine, but they are happening globally. Within some shifts in some countries, where the end of a certain political apparatus allows an extreme economical shifts in these countries.
There's a lot of thoughts came to my mind when you guys were talking. I feel like that it almost sounds like as if in certain ways the Palestinian state was kind of, or whatever, kind of, the Palestinian Authority is almost like it's like privatized occupation. It sounds like, in a certain way, which is a very strange combination of words, I feel like. But this basically, what that means is it becomes dependent on international funding, or basically the goodness of countries' hearts, in which, while maybe there were some good intentions for some of these countries for doing this, at the same time, what it has ended up doing is, I guess, breaking those kind of those social bonds that existed previously, where like economic relations were based more on these kind of like mutual bonds rather than purely mediated through money. And this like mediation through money has sort of like broken down those types of relationships, which is a big, I guess, ideological. Well, it comes from an ideological point of view from neoliberalism as a way to kind of like fix the problem is kind of like by throwing money at it. It's kind of a
100%.
big part of it.
Yeah. A good example I can think of is like if, let's say, what's changing right now. It hasn't completely changed, but for example, a friend of mine wants to get married, and this transitions to like the idea that we have around Nqud. And usually, and still predominantly in Palestine, there's the concept of Nqud. If you want to get married, you need, weddings are big in Palestine. So a lot of people are coming, you feed them. So you need a lot of money. So one of the ways is to basically is for people coming into the wedding to pitch in. Before, because you feed people at a wedding, people used to come in and bring bags of rice so that you can cook the rice, or bring meat, for example, or bring now money, regular money. But now what's changing is that sometimes people want to get married and they don't have enough, they want to make a huge wedding or something, and they might go to a bank. And what changed is that, structures are being broken. Instead of going to your brother or your cousin or your neighbor or your community to help fund you, you're going to a bank, which is somebody that you do not know. If something happens to you, the bank doesn't care. It wants its money back. And it's a relation that's, I don't know how, like it's a stranger that you're dealing with instead of your community. So, and take that on a wider scale for funding for anything that you want to do. You're going to a financial institution, and access to finance is important on a lot of different levels, but it also breaks down this social bond between people, the social capital. And Yazan, if you want to talk actually a bit more about Nqud and the whole concept of it, which was actually a inspiration for Dayra.
Yes. Yeah, in general, I think when we began our research in the question of funding, we began looking into two things. First, our question was, what are the existing socio-economical structures that exist within the community that we have to learn about and know about, and they are still practiced. So we are not coming with any new kind of idea of let's create a communal economy or something. No, but it exists. But we wanted to know how does it exist and what are the principles that it's based on. And the second part was, while researching, also we don't want to only produce knowledge, but we also want to use this knowledge into producing infrastructures for the community to tap on when needed, or if it makes sense to the community. So the idea is not to also create kind of forced structures. So we began looking at different models. We kind of were interested in three mainly. One is called Nuqut, which means dripping, and what's nice about dripping, it's also you can imagine it that it is, like when you have a hole in the ceiling and then it's dripping, and you think, oh, I'm gonna put this pot under it, and of course it's just a few drops, and then you wake up in the morning, the pot is full, and it's like, how come all this, like this water came out of dripping? And it's something. What's amazing about it that it's an example of how the community supports its kind of future reproduction. it happens in weddings. It used to happen, as Sami said, through bringing gifts, you bring rice or sugar or salt or whatever is needed for the wedding to happen, and that changed to bringing money. Um, and people depend on it. Like, people know that if you want to do a wedding, people will bring always come with this kind of small gift. They either put it in an envelope, and there are different traditions. Either people put their money in an envelope and put it in a box, or in other villages, they come and you bring your money note, and you put it on the clothes of the groom. Like, you really like attach it to it, and so like you see like these grooms just walking with lots of money around them. It's a kind of, there are different traditions of it, and um, um, and you do this wedding knowing that people will bring it, not because people love you and you are sure of that love, but because you already know that they are indebted to you. Like, there is kind of a move of the debt that comes from one generation to the other, or from one part of the society to the other. This kind of movement of a debt, of acknowledging the debt and trusting that we will always pay back the debt, makes one always involved in such a process. That you go to every wedding that you are invited to, you bring this nqut with you, knowing that when you, your cousin, your brother, your sister, whoever in the family gets married, you will be paid back through that. And this kind of a movement of a communal debt that keeps the community alive, and it's always like small amounts. It can be from $10. If you're gonna use, of course, we use Israeli shekels, but it can be from $1 to $10, or whatever you can, up to whoever, $100 or more. So that's one example that we thought it's interesting to look at as a movement of debt through generations. The other example we were looking at is what we call it the shop's notebooks, daftar al-dukan, and that happens usually in villages, or in a small communities, small kind of like small communities, let's say, and it's a notebook that shop owners have. And you can always come if you are from that community or from that village, and you know that shop, and you are a usual customer to that shop. You can come and say, look, I don't have money this time, or and I need to buy. And they write what you bought on this notebook. It's a kind of like a debt. Again, a debt relation. And I personally witnessed once, and people protect this notebook. It's important to protect it, no? And I saw once, I witnessed a case where a shop was burned, and burned with it the notebook. And I saw people coming to the shop, reminding, to say, okay, look, we have this amount in debt to you, to protect, because they know if they don't protect it, no other shop will allow it. If they don't protect this kind of registrar of debt, because then they depend on it, because they know that by the end of the month, or in the middle of the month or something, that they don't have enough support, money to buy, and they need to have food. And then how do you create this kind of social structure of support? And I find it, we found it very interesting that there are local registrars, and of course these have been challenged by big supermarkets, that they don't have such things, that there's no personal and social relations between the person who sells and the person who buys. They are just employees. Whereas in Lebanon, for example, and this is an example I was reading about, when the financial crisis began and people could not, the inflation was so crazy that only that people who had these connections with the shops managed to get their stuff. Whereas the people who always bought from supermarkets, they were in crisis because they don't have these, because social relations don't happen in a day. You just don't go to a shop and say, look, I've never bought from you here, but it doesn't work like this. You need trust, and you need this kind of familiarity and experience, and this trust is built through time. So we were looking at this as another example. And the third example, we found it also very inspiring in many ways, which is the jam'iyya, the co-ops, but cooperatives, but not cooperative in the institutional image, but rather jam'iyya is, and usually it happens between women in the society, or it happens between employees who work in certain governmental jobs, mainly because it's also a kind of a small communities in the same building, etc. What happens is that, like, let's say 10 of them come together and agree that every month each one of them will put let's say just 100 euros in this pot, and every one of them can take the whole pot that month. So you come together, it's kind of like collective saving. And what's amazing about these is also it's based on trust. It's based on kind of you being indebted to each other, because the one who gets the money at the beginning has to keep paying the amount they agreed upon every month, although they already got the money. And they agree who takes the money first depending on need. Some people just want to save so they can get it at the end, but some people need to urgently use it for education of their children or for some expenses that they need immediately, so they can take it at the beginning. And this is kind of a debt that has it's not based on interest. It's not based on bank relations. It's only based on trust, on societal kind of relations. It's based on also on accepting the vulnerability of the community, that the vulnerability within the community is within the system itself, that it's not based on a kind of extracting or like taking out the vulnerability, and it's a system that has no possibility for failure. No, it includes it within it. And then it creates a support structure for the bigger community. So we looked at these kind of examples as examples of funding. Like these are structures within the community that we can look at as examples of how the community uses trust, debt, vulnerability, social relations as a way to create an economical structure that allows everyone to survive and to practice their economical life within the community. And yes, I don't know where I'm going here, but these are like.
But I think those are really interesting examples. I mean, it seems to me that there are ways of creating resilience within a community that are not like, it's not necessarily that they are removing money in these examples, because you can't really do that, but they're finding ways to use money that don't rely on a kind of alienated relationship that I guess people, especially if they grow up in like a very Western economy, like are probably very used to, that they would get money from the bank and then they would have interest to pay. And if you don't pay off your loan, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the past, I think we kind of, just in different types of, before this was really like the what has become essentially hegemonic at this point in the West. There were like much the types of relationships we were sort of engaging in that may have even involved money did not necessarily involve a type of alienated relationship with the person who is giving the loan and the person who is receiving it. So a lot more based on this trust, and this trust was actually a very important aspect in being able to create resilient communities and networks. So I think, like, especially with the Nuhut example, I think what's really interesting is that the thinking of like that you have a debt to pay to like the next generation, essentially, I think is like the one direction that's going, and then the other direction is sort of like a debt in my current community as well. So like what that means is that it requires more relationships. It requires like a wider net compared to what I think is like the norm in like neoliberal society, where you're almost like encouraged to go after where the most money already exists, like to go after the big pot rather than sort of releasing a wide net, I guess. And maybe just to make the connection as well, for perhaps like it just reminded me of like in the American political context of the difference in how every other political candidate was funded versus how Bernie Sanders was funded, which was through very small donations. It was a very wide net, and how successful that was for his campaign in general. And I think it's not a coincidence that he was a self-declared democratic socialist and not a liberal or whatever else. So I found those very, very interesting, like examples to think about how to create alternatives to kind of like the neoliberal inspired model of looking for money or looking for funding.
To add here, what you are saying is very essential here, in the sense that while we are looking at money models, like how money is a technology that the community uses, it is a medium of communal relations. But money is a tool of such relations. It's not the aim itself. No, it's not an act of financialization of communal relations. It is about how do we live and survive within this community in a way that allows us to not to be part of money industry in a way. Like if you think of the banks, it's a factory of money, and but also it allows to begin. It allows people to when trust is produced, it also or not produced, but when trust exists, it allows a non-monetary relations to happen, because when trust exists, then you can think, then other things happen. Like there is this example of al-auna. Al-auna is how to al-auna means to help, to support, and it is something that in villages, when there was a construction of a new house, or someone wants to build a fence or something, that they will agree after Friday prayer on that day, they will come and support each other, and the community will help to build. And again, this is kind of things that don't happen just because people want to volunteer, but it happens because people know that if they support now, you will get support in the future. This kind of, it's not thought, of course, as debt, but as a kind of exchangeable social relations, that you support, you are part of the community supports you back in the future, and these things also have been totally destroyed in the last 30 years. I remember being an architect, I worked in one of these funding agencies because that was also the economy that was available. And maybe it's good that one worked in it at some time, because then you understand exactly what is going on. And I remember this agency went as the architect in that agency. We went to a school, and we were taking notes of what are the problems in the school, like that need support to be funded structurally in the building. And they were showing us a hole in a wall and saying, that hole, we need to fix it. So we need funding for it. I was like, but why don't you fix it? Like, why are you waiting for this American or European agency to come and give you, I don't know, $50 to fix, to buy material? Why? What happened here? Knowing that the school itself was built communally. The whole, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, most of the school was built by the community. So these kind of things that happen to the society, making this idea of, like everything needs to get a donation, or you need to apply for it, or it's waiting for some money to come to support it. It made, like it built up a lot of thinking towards how do we approach it, and what is to be done, and how do we critique this funding and donor economy. How the donor economy is not only, again, a cultural, and a financial thing, but it becomes a culture. And we need to approach donor economy not from a financial point of view, but from political economy. It is an ideology. It is a way that people begin to practice their social life, their relations, their connections, and we need to think through that in however we want to address it now and in the future.
Hi everyone, if you're enjoying this episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the crypto leftist communities on Discord or Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you're enjoying the interview or find the content I make important, you can pitch into my efforts starting at $3 a month on patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist to help me out. It really helps since making this stuff isn't free in terms of money or time. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus content like Q&A episodes. You can submit and vote on questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in 20-30 minutes. In the last bonus episode, I reviewed one of Vitalik's latest papers he co-authored detailing his vision for decentralized society and use cases for soulbound tokens. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain doesn't need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So maybe we have mapped out kind of what are we mapped out how, I guess, Palestine got into this situation. It has a lot to do with the occupation, and sort of like the downstream effects of what that has caused, creating basically an entire economy that is very dependent on international funding, which has also created has sort of broken a lot of the types of social ties and culture around relationships between people and around their relationship with money and debt, and how that's kind of, I guess, been forced into a neoliberal model through this process. But so with the collective, you guys have been working on an interesting project called Dayra. Mm-hmm. Would you like to explain maybe how that works and how its attempts to think differently about the donor economy, using maybe some of these crypto tools?
So Dayra, to define it narrowly, is a medium of circulating communal economic value. It's a supplementary currency, kind of. It's not really a currency, that generates value through circulating existing resources and maintains wealth within the community. The crypto element of it is mostly as a tool. So we use blockchain technology because it supplements some of that trust that when the system is very small, trust exists, anyways, because, we're targeting, a very small community. But then as that community grows, you kind of supplement that trust and fill in the gaps with also added technologies that help with trust, and blockchain helps with trust. So it's mostly a tool, and it has nothing to do, I think, with the mainstream now cryptocurrencies that rely on speculation, or are the new reserve currency or whatever. It's mostly based on circulating resources within the community so that the community can fund itself. Because even if there is no money, for example, and this is actually something that happened in Sardinia, which is one of the projects that we drew inspiration from, Sardex. And this is why it's usually typical that these systems come up during areas of crisis, and it's very typical that Dayra came from Palestine, and now. And so Sardex in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, the guys at Sardex realized that, okay, we have the factories stopped working because of the financial crisis, because they couldn't get any loans, for example, because people weren't paying back their loans, so the banks were not giving out loans because they were afraid, because some bank in the US defaulted. So, but factories still had the employees, they still had the materials, but they couldn't produce. So they came up with a system where you have the resources available at each period of the value chain for creating, for example, juice bottles, and you have the oranges, for example, or whatever, and then you have the glass, and then but you need to connect them so that they're able to go to the supermarket, and then everybody gets paid, but you have to do it outside of money because the money system is now broken. So they had to create these kinds of systems, and we have to create this kind of system for our community also, because it has not dissipated yet, and we're not at that stage as like you mentioned, a lot of neoliberal economies in Europe are, but we need to preserve what we have, because resilience is a huge issue for us. And we need to be resilient to stay in this land, because everything around us is basically forcing us to leave. That's settler colonialism. They're trying to get you to not stay in this place, and in order to stay and to resist, you need to be able to know that I can resist and I can stay knowing that my children will be okay and will be fed. And in order to do that, you need to rely on the community. And in order for the community to be successful, it needs to be able to spread its resources and exchange their resources efficiently. So the crypto element of it is purely technical. It also supplements, gaps in trust, but Dayra is mostly a system rather than a currency. So it's a medium of exchange where you actually, Yazan, if you want to talk a bit more about how the system works.
Sure. Maybe to say, yes, we keep saying we are not crypto, we are not a currency, and we are not a coin.
I understand. I understand the reasoning for wanting to say
that. We might have elements of all of these, but
that's not the focus.
Yes, that's not the focus, and we try to also not use these terms because these terms are very connected to a certain understanding of what the blockchain.
It's loaded.
It's loaded, and it's it kind of became what people think of the blockchain. And we want to the cryptocurrency is one use of what the blockchain can give us. The blockchain is not about cryptocurrencies. It's about contracts and I forgot the language.
Smart contracts.
Smart contracts, yes. And it's about creating, like how to move things and how relations and how to store the information, etc., rather than only the crypto use of it. So we are trying to use this technology as a way to a way to allow the community and certain economical practices in the community to move and to be used and to be circulated in the community. And we are looking at different things. One of them is that funding, as we know it, begins from the idea of scarcity, that there's no resources, and then it comes from an international donor, and they throw money, and then the funding goes top bottom, not top down. And we're trying to approach it in a different way, that actually we want to approach funding from the point of view of abundance, that there are local resources, an abundance of local resources within the community, and that we can begin creating a kind of a funding through this movement and the circulation of these resources. So from zero funding, we build up towards a communal wealth that can be exchanged and stored in the future, like across time and place. And the idea is very simple. Like there are different resources. There is knowledge, there is skills, there are spaces, there are equipment, there are social relations. There are so many assets within the community that can be used when this community needs them. That can be exchanged, and that can be we can look at them as an existing wealth. Okay.
Mm.
The problem happens is sometimes that what happens with the high financialization of the community, that these things cannot be exchanged unless through money.
Right.
Through, so the problem is money. But we don't want to create a financial system. We want to go back to the idea of money to its basic use. Money are units that keep the track of the registry, and that we can, with an expanded community, not only based on social relations of trust, but community can be expanded, and it can include people that don't know each other, and then these kind of resources can be exchanged and can be circulated. And what we are trying to do here also, it's not an NFT, and that's so we are pushing against it. What has value within the system is not what can be minted, is not the asset itself, but rather the act of sharing of that asset. So what you mint is the relation.
Yeah, like the edge rather than the node. Maybe you can think it.
Yeah, that you're willing to share it with the community, whether that, and expecting that you'll get it in return, at some point, and measurable, with, something with points, basically, but that you're willing to put it within the circle of community, so that other people may use it, and that that you're also, because you also need to get resources. If you put this knowledge out there, somebody takes it, uses it, and it could be, B2B, you're going directly to that person, but you're also getting something in exchange for it. And, other means, I think money was created because people used to trade chicken for fish. And then at some point, one person didn't want fish; they wanted, I don't. Yeah. So you had to find. So there was a missing link. So you had to find another person that wants that. So that and money made things very simple, and it used to be something of inherent values and based on scarcity, like gold and silver. But in reality, and using now technology that made it available, so you don't need that coin, and you don't need that piece of paper with government debt on it to tell you that this has value. Whatever you have has inherent value as long as you're willing to share it. And if you're putting it on the system to be shared, then somebody else will share something else on the system, and then if you want it, you get it. And really within the economy, everybody wants a haircut, everybody wants water, so there's within the economy, there's the essentials are there, if you get enough people on board, so that there's always, you can live your daily life in essence using that circular economy. Maybe the big institutionalized things like gasoline cannot be, but we're not there to kind of replace the system. We know we can't, but we're trying to create something that can offer a bit more resilience, a bit more safety, that when there's a crisis happening, that you can still go into the community to get something. So you're going in essence in the minus to get your need, and the community knows that you'll be giving it back at some point in the future.
And to add to this, like Dayra, when joining Dayra, you join a communal debt rather than like you come in accepting that you will hold part of the communal debt, and that what we will be doing all the time is just a movement and shifting of that debt within the community. You cannot leave that debt unless you leave the community or you leave Dayra as a community. But that debt is not, like a debt that has any. It's not about legal power and that someone will come to you. Like you hold it by being there, and the community then you can use some of the community resources, or you can share your resources with the community. And then this debt begins to move and to change and to morph within the whole structure.
I wonder, because I think a lot of people, some people who may be listening may think, therefore, like it's kind of mediated rather than money. We're mediating through reputation a bit, or like through maybe just like social standing within the community, which I imagine in these types of situations plays a part in it in some ways.
I think at the beginning, definitely. At the stage where it becomes a bit bigger, where two people might not know each other, then you're relying on the trust in the other people within the community. That they're not going to cheat you out of it.
Kind of second order reputation.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, but it's. I think it's based on. So yes, but that's the whole what Dayra is. So Dayra is kind of, imagine like in the core of it. It has the blockchain technology, but it's covered, engulfed within the Dayra governance system. Okay, the social relations. So
right.
And this social relation is what Dayra is. So this is what we are trying to program and trying to develop with the community and trying to create a user experience of, is how do you mediate social relations through the app of Dayra app. How do you deal with disputes? How do you deal with moments of disagreements? How do you deal with moments? How do you create a kind of
mediation?
No, not mediation. It has a word.
Arbitration.
Arbitration. Yes. how do you create an arbitration if needed? Like let's say, tell you an example happened to me personally. Okay, before I come to Amsterdam, I had a car in Ramallah and I want to sell it. And cars in Palestine are expensive, even if it's a small car. So I wanted to sell my car for 10,000 euros. Anyway, I didn't want to sell it through the bank. I didn't want to sell it to someone to tell me, like that will take a loan and makes it like I will get less money and he will pay or she will pay more money and the bank will take. I wanted to sell it to someone directly, but how to do it? So you take checks and you do these things, but also I felt like, okay, can I actually try this kind of trust relations? So I asked friends and who wants to buy a car. Eventually, someone that I know, friend through a friend, that they said they wanted to buy the car, and they said we're gonna pay you in installments. In 6 months, it will be paid totally. First months came, they paid. Second months they came, they couldn't pay, and they began to saying, sorry, we are having troubles. Eventually, friends came in between and said, okay, look, we guarantee this, that it will be paid, but this guy needs actually more time. And said, okay, I will accept this. And when the time came, it was totally paid. You can say, yes, it is reputation because people came and, mediators, that they came in and said, okay, we are sure, we know this person, don't worry, we can do it, and we validate the reasons that this person is saying for why they cannot pay, and we validate the fact that they do have the money but they cannot. Anyway, like they gave me assurances, and I thought, although it came with some trouble, and of course, banks promise you a troubleless process if as long as you pay, no, like as long as everyone is getting paid. But if you want to engage with social relations, you have to accept that it comes with frictions and comes with some kind of glitches and problems, and when thinking of blockchain, we should not think of a system that is totally based on trustlessness. Like I will send the money and that's it. Transaction is done. The smart contract will do it on its own. But how to do it? How to use this kind of trustlessness within a structure of trust? How do you create these kind of mechanisms through programming and through allowing a certain kind of social intervention within the app that allows these frictions to come to the community and be discussed or to be challenged or to be solved. And this is kind of what we are trying to do with Dayra and to do with the blockchain. So how, from our different experiences, I come from art, Sami comes from economical knowledge and education, Abed comes from blockchain, other members. How do we push all our knowledges and our approaches within a kind of a political view of how we think we can think of economy within the community, and how do we push the technology then? Like how do we push it outside of its comfort zone? And this is kind of what we are trying to do in Dayra. Sometimes, and that's a big challenge to us, how do you create a Dayra experience without the complications if you don't want them, and with the involvement and the complications when you need them? So you can have you should, of course, everyone, each one of us want to live a problemless life. No, like we don't want to have problems every time I do buy something. I need to be aware of, like, okay, maybe I need to do arbitration because I bought this. No, like you don't want that. Of course, you want fast, easy life. We live in a fast and fast economy and fast society, but these there are multi-levels of engaging. That's one thing. And the second thing, which is important, that you engage when you need it. We are all ready to engage with certain issues when there's a need. So while it's based on abundance of resources, it's also based on acceptance of crisis. That the crises happen. We need support structures in these moments, and we need structures that don't allow us to fall. And here I can, give examples of the center that I was working on, Khalili Sakini Cultural Center, and how the crisis created a community. Not that I'm a what do you call it, a supporter of crises, but how do we create structures that make these crises less heavy on the most vulnerable in the society? This is the challenge always, I think, within these kind of economical structures.
I just want to say a couple of things. I think what's really interesting about Dayra and this view about wealth, that I think in neoliberal society, I think you kind of summarize it well on your website. You say money has become the main measure of wealth in any given society and medium of exchange. So like I think there's like this creation of like a monoculture of value, where it's just about like basically the size of your bank account or the amount of dollars or financial money that you have, and that's sort of like your wealth.
Yeah.
But I think here we're challenging that, and which, also the fact that this was never the case in like human history until like quite recently, probably as well, but that you can have wealth without money, in the sense that you can have all the resources that you need to do things, but the needing money is sort of like a artificial thing that is sort of like imposed top down, needing to do. It's just about in order to it also, I think, kind of proves that all value comes from labor, but like to make that labor happen, you like money, I guess, is one way to make that happen, is to like pay and incentivize someone through money, but also to like have the social relationships and the support in order to know that like the fact that you're going to commit to labor, that you're doing labor, that you're still, other people are going to commit labor to you as well. They're going to help you out whenever you need it, which is why I think like probably in the past, for example, the hole in the wall, or with the school, that it was communally built, because I think probably before there was this invasion of kind of like the donor economy, then people had more assurances that their community was going to help out. And since that has dropped off and created dependence on international funding, like now the school is more incentivized to like use the hole in the wall, perhaps maybe to ask for more funding, because that's the only place that they feel like they can get support from in like the way that things have been kind of like artificially constructed. And so what I like about Dayra is that it is accepting this kind of view, and also like allowing for medium of exchange with the wealth that maybe you already have, but also that it is thinking about, because the default cryptocurrency type of system is a very much an alienated one for the most part, where it comes from like a particular worldview, and here I think it's interesting that what it means if we want to unalienate ourselves from our kind of financial relations, it kind of requires this arbitration, or this need for arbitration, where that is an option, because in an unalienated financial relation, like in the example with your car, like maybe your friend of a friend, they may not be able to pay 1 month, and so like you, instead of 6 months like you originally agreed upon, it's going to take 7 or 8 months. But because you have the assurances of friends, of your mutual friends, and they can guarantee you, then and they have that support, like there is this arbitration happening in that context, and that sort of needs to be realized maybe in the blockchain world, if you're going to use this technology. And in the technology needs to kind of allow for this arbitration, for this governance of crises, maybe you can kind of think of it. So if you, rather than sort of, I think the default being not necessarily a non-governance of crises, but the governance of crises is handled purely through like markets. It's purely handled through on the market. And, you know, if you don't pay, then maybe like you lose a bunch of money, someone is screwed, someone gets like trapped in debt in a bad way, you know, things like this. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think another feature that it allows you to do is also have kind of a community fund. So with the more exchanges that happen on the system grows naturally. So, and there's a surplus. And that surplus is sometimes used by corporations, you know, to pay employees or whatever. But we don't have that. And a good way is that with every transaction, you kind of get the surplus in your account, but in separate kind of points. And they're used for a community pot. So basically, if there's a project that can benefit the whole community, for example, if your community is within one village and there's a street that needs to be paved so that people can access their land better, you're able to have that, extra point towards paving the street, and people can, vote on which project that they want to fund, so that these projects that are useful for the entire community can happen, such as, for example, fixing up the school. So it's a way to also get funding when you're sometimes an institution that might not have direct means of, of funding. Because if the community values it, then it can fund it as well. And if it's something that's beneficial to the community, whether it's a road to actually make life easier, or, for example, a fence to protect from wild boars, which is actually a problem here, or whether it's a cultural institution that people think it's important, to help their children, to help the community process things. So this, crypto makes it available in a much nicer way, and that governance mechanism is built in, so that also there's a community impact, and it acts in essence a form like a government, where basically a government is supposed to do that, but on a micro level, we can do that.
Right. It's so like one of the kind of my I guess theses since doing this project is that perhaps like the blockchain technology, or crypto, whatever you want to call it, is perhaps a useful tool in situations, especially when both the state and the market are kind of failing to meet people's needs. And I think especially in Palestine, where there is not much of a state and the market is just like international funding, where we've already discussed all the problems with that, having sort of like the third sector, rather than public-private, you maybe have like the civil sector or the autonomous sector, where people are kind of like making the decision themselves and sort of putting it within their own hands to manage, the world around them.
Yeah. And here, I think in Dayra, but also in other social projects and social mediums of exchange, it's trying to defy this idea of independence. Okay, like it is trying to create always a structure of interdependency. And this idea of like we are either dependent on the state or independent from international funding, these kind of I think they such things do not totally do not exist, as much as what we have is an interdependent structures on multi levels. One is no one economical structure should be dominant, but what we need is a kind of a multi-structures in the society. The second thing is we need to think of funding outside of money only, meaning that when I worked in Khalili Cultural Center, and then we were speaking about diversifying our resources, that meant all the time um, to get money from different resources. So, but to think of what does it mean to diversify means that you survive on different resources other than money. So money becomes one part of income or of a resource, but we need to think of other idea of economy and its change outside of only get money from the donors, get money from private funders, get money from individuals. Like that. The idea is to diversify money, but no, we need to diversify economy itself, and that's crucial in the way that we need to understand why we are doing the things that we are doing. Are we doing it because we want to get money, or we are doing it because of other things? To give you the cultural institution example, it's a cultural institution totally dependent on funding. It was made actually a cultural institution as such to be able to apply for international funds, meaning an NGO. But when financially it could not survive anymore, we approached finance from an economical point of view. The question was, why do we have a cultural center? And the answer is not to apply for funding, but it is actually to produce culture, to engage with culture, to allow culture to happen, to be an infrastructure for cultural practices. So for a cultural institution to diversify its resources didn't mean that we need to only apply for funding to receive money to be able to produce cultural activities. The approach was, would the community be interested and willing to produce culture within the existing resources of the institution, meaning spaces, equipment, support of the employees, etc., etc. So what happened is that the center began to produce cultural activities with the community without having to have money as an initiator of such activities, because the community wanted a cultural space to produce and to do things. Culture moved regardless of finances. Of course, the center still needed support, which we also began thinking of diversifying the financial income from applying for funds or receiving support from individuals and businesses, etc. But that was around only 50% of the bigger image or the bigger structure of cultural production. So, what I want to say is that we need to think of economy and economical. When we think of economy, we need to think of what does it mean to diversify and what does it mean to be interdependent.
Diversifying away from money, perhaps, as a strategy.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to talk to, perhaps, before you have to go, is you guys presented Dayra at Documenta, which is a large kind of art show. I don't know too much about it, to be perfectly honest, but I know it's like one that happens every few years in Kassel, Germany, I believe, where a bunch of different artists come together to present their work, and there is usually a theme. I think this year it was led by Ruang Grupa, which is an artist collective from Indonesia. But maybe would you like to talk about what happened at Documenta? Because I think there was perhaps a little bit of controversy around your project.
Yeah,
we don't need to spend too much time on it, of course.
Yeah, because it wasn't a little bit of a controversy. It was really a big one. That
a fiasco,
and that it somehow still hovers in the air on top of us. But just to say, this year's Documenta, and it happens every 5 years, it was led by Ruang Grupa and other members of their artistic team. And the idea was they created this structure which is called lumbung. And lumbung is an Indonesian practice that is about storing rice harvest every year in a big village pot or like a rice barn, and everyone in the community brings their harvest, they put it there, and then they use whatever they need from it, and then the rest is shared with the community as an income or sold. Or so it's a kind of a socialist practice in its essence, the lumbung. And this practice this year was kind of extended to the structure of what a big exhibition can be. So the lumbung was a practice that was introduced to different collectives, and so different collectives who also thought through these kind of economical methods and economical practices were invited, and we kind of um, came together and began thinking not only of exhibiting our work, but how do we practice the lumbung, this kind of collective pot, this collectivity, as a general exhibition. How do we practice it in making the exhibition, but how do we practice it with the communities we are working with our ecosystems back home? How do we bring these kind of knowledges that we are practicing back home into Kassel? Because this is one of the things that is always problematic in art practice, is how it's kind of extracts knowledge from one place and just brings it into another, to the center, to the hubs of Europe and the US. So the lumbung was a practice of how do we do things organically uh, in our ecosystems back home, and then how do we translate these? So not to bring them as such, but how do we translate them to Europe and to the audiences that are in Kassel. So this is kind of the promise of this Documenta, and which created, I think, an amazing collective work and collective projects, and the fact that the artists know each other for 2-3 years of working together. This never happened in an art exhibition. Usually artists are mediated, all of them, through the curators. We only meet in the opening or when we read our names in the efflux journal. Like it's a very
Right.
separated structure, but this time we knew each other, and we kind of were. Everyone was involved in each other's work or in deciding who to invite, and it was an open structure in many ways. Sadly, this promise of Documenta, which was totally fulfilled within the exhibition, was covered by a kind of a hostile smear campaign that began in Germany from the moment that Documenta were invited, and then went through accusing many of the artists in Documenta of anti-Semitism because of their work or their critique of the atrocities by the Israeli state. And it was a kind of a utilized campaign using, I would say, German guilt as a way to enforce political agendas by some of the mainstream media. If you want to ask me what is the main lesson or like the essence of all of this is really how do you produce art and culture in the time of social media? meaning that the smear campaigns that happened and the attacks that happened at us was totally utilizing the social sphere in a very aggressive and very um, um, non-logical sense. Like it's like what we called it, like from pseudo research to pseudoscience, going through a kind of a media that is feeding on these kind of fake news, fake information, fake science, fake research to create a hostile and very aggressive sphere that doesn't allow any kind of um, equal exchange of knowledge to happen.
Right. It wasn't a discussion. It was just sort of like
Zero discussion.
getting berated or something by accounts online or
Yeah,
these
it
type
was
of things.
just like smear campaigns, and we were kind of muted through a process of very aggressive attacks that had no uh, um, basis on them, except that it's utilizing um, German history in a very aggressive way um, against um, uh, the Palestinian on one side, but also against many of the um, non-European artists, and I would say also um, um, against anyone who does not adopt exactly what European universalism see of what the word is. Like if you don't adopt what German elite think the word is, you were attacked and smeared um, um, in this document. Yeah. It was very aggressive, which is very scary because as an artist and as a public intellectual, being in public, being out there is what you do, no? Like you don't do things in secret. But then if the field and the public space becomes so hostile and so scary, it becomes impossible to produce and to work in a critical sense, um, whether in Palestine or anywhere else, because this is an example of how um, um, official, I don't know if I'm going to call it mainstream media, but official media that has offices and
An
journalists,
apparatus,
an
perhaps.
apparatus, begin to work as a social media trolls. So a troll page, a blog page, throws a very non-research يعني like just whatever bullshit you want to put on your own blog, and then these media apparatuses use it as a source of knowledge. So the trolls feed the media with their kind of the the aggressive information. They give them bases for the non-factual
Right.
information, and then media builds on it a whole campaign without fact-checking or even wanting to fact-check. And this is the scary part, I think, for any future political movements.
Yeah, I think
Because
especially if you're just if you're part of like a targeted group, if you're Palestinian, if you're or if you're challenging kind of the elite power structures that exist, then just the fact that they are kind of at the top, they also have the resources to kind of fund what can seem like grassroots movements or like grassroots,
Yes.
you know, like public scrutiny, whenever really it's just something where there's very little, if any, civil resistance on like Twitter, for example, or on most of these social media platforms. So it's very easy to fund these
Yeah.
types of campaigns for them. So even if you are coming from a place of wanting to start your own more authentic grassroots type of movement, the type of pseudo grassroots movement that someone who is elite can sort of kind of pretends to make appear can happen so fast and so much quicker than of course it's kind of like they have the saying like lies are able to revolve around the earth while like truths are still tying their shoes type of
So
thing.
I would say this is exactly what happened. Like, I think for the first article to come and say what the fuck is going on, it took it, I think, 3 months, while I think hundreds already of these smear campaign articles already came out, because they don't need to do any kind of checking or
Yeah, there's I wish I'm forgetting the term, but there is a term. It's like it's Brandolini's law, I think, where it is, infinitely it takes infinitely less energy to make bullshit, to make lies than it does to disprove those lies. So it's always you're always if you're subject to those, it takes too much energy to disprove every single one in a way that then
yes,
in a network that everybody is going to be able to understand.
yes,
It's near impossible to get to that point.
yeah,
And I
It's
think
and
tough.
sorry, Sami.
I think it's like creating controversy. Like even if you investigate or whatever, and that you think that person has no blame, but creating controversy on its own kind of holds a stigma on that work or that person or the message that you're trying to say, so that other people are a lot more cautious of approaching you in the future. Like for me, watching it from back home, like from Jerusalem, I mean, here it's very obvious, like the situation is very obvious, like silencing people is very obvious, the occupation is very obvious, and I sympathize with Yazan being in Germany and Amsterdam had to go through, because for us at least it's clear when they're trying
You
to
can
snap.
point outside, I
Exactly.
guess.
And there it's that you have to defend yourself, and first you're confused. Why do you have to defend yourself? And then you have to defend yourself in a way where you don't look guilty, and in a way where you're also professional, and in a way that you cannot, like me, demand. For example, we are very clear on what we think and what our demands for justice are, and there you have to appease kind of that doesn't understand the full context. You have to appease people that Europeans that don't understand the full extent of everything. You can't tell them, oh, we're here for armed struggle or whatever. If you are, I mean, sometimes some people are, some people aren't. But what I'm saying is, like, yeah, you have to be super cautious. And then at the end of it, I think what I think they were successful at doing is creating controversy, where this person or this group or becomes, if somebody wants to take you on or if you're invited somewhere else, institutions are a lot more cautious, and they have to think, do I want this trouble? Is it worth it? And for the brave, maybe it is, but you can also, that it's a way of silencing
Yes,
that
because
voice.
it's literally illegal.
In
Like,
Germany.
no. What happened to us was illegal. Like, يعني, these accusations of anti-Semitism like never went to the court, for example. Like because if it went to the court, it would have been proven that it's there's no anti-Semitism.
It's defamation.
Defamation, exactly. It's so there's in a way these were the whole attacks were based on just creating a massive controversy, an inability to who to address. Just like it's a tsunami that is moving. It has no structure. It has no it has no way to understand it. It has no reason. It's just like one article after the other, creating a public debate, pressure on the politicians to take action against something that they don't know what to do with. They just begin a kind of investigation that has no basis, that doesn't know where to go. And when it happens in such a very hostile public sphere, it also added to that, because there was no academic who's willing to come out in public and say this is all wrong. So it was a very hostile situation that it doesn't allow for any reasonable opinion to come out and say this is wrong. So it became just like one drags the other, and what it creates is a question not of should I invite this person again? Is it legal to invite this person again or not? But do I want the trouble when inviting this person or not? And that's the scary part of it, that it becomes the public space itself becomes very hostile and doesn't allow for any opinion that doesn't exactly fit within these public
public opinion, kind of.
Yes. So in a way,
manufactured opinion.
Yes, and I cannot imagine of any place other than like totalitarian regimes, like where the public opinion is totally produced by this kind of hostility against a minority, a group of people, and it utilizes certain fears, certain histories to create a space that is totally closed. And this is what's happening here. Like now bringing the Palestinian resistance against the occupation and connecting it to anti-Semitism, which is connected to German history itself, and the German guilt. Putting them together makes it impossible to or it makes it harder to support a Palestinian, or not only a Palestinian, but an international critique of the Zionist apparatus, which is now being totally documented as something that is apartheid structure by Amnesty. So it's just like a weird situation where on one side it's being totally legally proven to be apartheid. On the other side, the public opinion is being put against these legal structures.
And I think if you have trouble, kind of, you don't want to talk about the idea. It's not that you have trouble even proving the idea wrong. For example, if Palestinians are oppressed, there's occupation, needs to go. There's a need for resistance against the occupation. You end up not wanting to talk about the idea at all. You either do character assassinations or you bring, this. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, the shadow of anti-Semitism, and I think it's a huge problem because one, it basically pairs anti-Semitism with anti-Israeli sentiment. So if you're anti-Israeli government, then that means you're anti-Semitic. If you say something about something wrong the Israeli government is doing, then you're anti-Semitic. This is horrible because it also kind of waters down actual anti-Semitism, which exists in Europe. So it's not like it doesn't exist. It exists, but it kind of it waters it down with association with Israel. And no, absolutely, we absolutely reject the idea that being anti-Israeli, Israeli government, anti-Israeli policies, anti-occupation means anti-Semitism. This is a huge mistake that will eventually be paid by also the Jewish community that does support Palestinian rights. You're also stifling them as well, and doing injustice to the Jewish community by mixing up a rightful cause with a not rightful cause of anti-Semitism.
Right. I think it's of course, it's a very dangerous conflation, because I mean, you do see this. What has happened is actually, there has been perhaps people could argue like an increase in anti-Semitic attacks, where in countries where the right has increased in popularity, and of course the standard playbook from the right is to choose certain scapegoats. And in other countries, in Israel, maybe the scapegoat you could consider to be Palestinians. In other countries, it is Jewish people. And so by supporting like this rise in conservative or right-wing, like basically fascist politics, then you're shooting your own people in the foot in other countries, and it's extremely dangerous. I really want to thank you. I know you have to leave for a doctor's appointment, but I really want to thank you so much for coming on and having the bravery to speak about this and to share your work with Dayra and the question of funding. I think it's a really interesting project that people should look into more. Maybe to just finish it off, if you want to share with others where people can keep up with the progress of your project.
So we have a website that hopefully will be updated very soon. It's called Dayra.net, Dayra.net. And we have another website, which is called thequestionoffunding.com. This is also will be updated soon. Whatever you're going to see now, it's still under construction and trials. But hopefully in the coming months, we'll have our first testnet for Dayra, which we will try to make it open for a bigger audience around the world. But then when we try it, we're going to try it really on the ground in our community first in Ramallah, and slowly see how we're going to open it up for global use or different localities around the world. So it's not that's would take us to another discussion now.
Sure, maybe in our next conversation.
Hopefully. And really, thank you so much, Josh, for this. It's been really a pleasant discussion, and we are happy to, because also when we speak about it, we learn more about what we are doing.
Nice. I think you probably taught me a lot more than I taught you, but thank you so much for coming on.